Well, hello. Happy Monday. We're talking Tales from the Morgue. There's a show called Secrets from the Morgue. Yeah, it's true. It's Monday, and this is like my favorite day of the week. I'm Nathan, and you're you, and I'm glad you're here. It's a great day to be alive. Thanks for 150,000, 153,000, but 150,000 streams for last time. Thank you for streaming on Spotify. Thank you for streaming wherever you stream. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're here tonight. And I want to talk to you about Tales from the Hole. All right, we're going to go and count down 10 crazy, odd stories regarding morgues. Morgues are obviously places you would normally find, when you think of one, in a hospital, right? When someone dies in a hospital room, in a hospital bed, for instance, they would then be transported to the morgue. A hospital should have one. They should. And actually, when you are present at a hospital, if you've lost a loved one at the hospital, my love, my sympathies, the whole purpose of this video is to talk about like the not so good side, right? The side that we don't. Am I live? I'm live. I was like, I'm sorry, I can't see the screen behind this new camera. This is the side that we don't necessarily talk about, like the bad side, right? So everything that I share is just for educational purposes and entertainment purposes too. And know that majority of people are good. Remember that. People are good, generally speaking. Let's dive in. This is number 10. We're going to go 10 to 1, no particular order. For the unfortunates, quote unquote, who died in Albany, West Australia, 1889. There wasn't much dignity with their deaths. Obviously, paupers and poor people, especially back then, they were second class, third class citizens. I mean, if you do any research on the Titanic, obviously a third class. There was no dignity. Their bodies were placed in a little shed on the prison grounds of this particular place in Western Australia, where water would rain down on their bodies from a leaky roof. Upon entering the dead house, is what they called it, their bodies were placed on an old wooden table. A small blanket, by the way, a wood bacteria, was placed on them to cover their intimate parts. I call them courtesy cloths. I think that's important, Like I'll never forget when my aunt was talking to me about, one day when you care for me, I don't want you to see me nude. And I was like, I don't want to see you nude. Courtesy cloths, very important. It's good that at least there were courtesy cloths here in 1889 at this dead house. Weird. Until the time to place them in an unnamed hole in the ground, unmarked. Sadly, the condition of the dead house at Albany was nothing compared to that in Beechworth, Victoria. Now we'll go to 1877, so just a few years before, it was reported that the hospital's dead house was dangerously unsafe. Doctors claimed that it had accumulated putrid matter of the very worst description. Obviously, also known as unsanitary or gross. Have you ever been to a morgue? Like for a school project, science project, or science, something? Let me know in the chat. I'm glad you're here, by the way, once again. Dr. Dobbin said that it was merely a place for bottling up the germs of disease. So this doctor said, like, this place is so disgusting that this is only for, take out the deceased loved ones. This is only for growing bacteria and germs. That's pretty bad. That's what that's saying. A committee decided that it was time to erect a new dead house in the vicinity. However, several doctors were worried about ripping up the old flooring and removing the dirt beneath the building because it could have revealed a deadly plague into the populace. Which, if it were that disgusting, respectfully speaking, that doctors, people of modern medicine of that time, were fearful of a plague, I can't imagine or fathom that. And I've seen some things and been in environments that are not the most pleasant. The building was so disgusting that doctors also believed that the hospital might be committing murder by sending men in to demolish it. Instead, it was recommended that the ground beneath the building not be disturbed. Wow. So disgusting, in fact, that they felt that anyone who went to clean it or to renovate, they were sending them to their deaths, and it would have been murder for the... Oh my gosh. That's terrible. And if you're wondering why we talk about this stuff, you know, I'm a musician. I've spent nearly 13 years in the funeral profession. I feel that my works, who I've worked alongside some of the most incredible people, have inspired my songs, especially post-pandemic. And I think that there's this beautiful thing about suffering. I don't welcome it. It's not like I'm excited about suffering, but I do know that through suffering, there is victory. And I do know that suffering brings this opportunity to have perspective, not perception. Perspective. Perspective is slow to judgment, compassion for, a sense of humbleness, a sense of kindness that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise have, because you've experienced things and you're seeing this world differently because you're putting yourself in another's shoes. Perspective. And that's why I love to share stories about not only the funeral profession, my music, which I'm so proud of. It's number 12 at radio still. I don't. It's like crazy. Last time, thanks for sharing it and streaming it. There's also this beautiful thing about the curtain and pulling it back in the funeral profession, but there's also, people ask me and they're like, Nathan, what do you like to do in your spare time? I watch documentaries, World War II. I love crime documentaries. And so we talk about crime documentaries and the macabre and like paranormal stuff because we're weirdos. So I'm glad you're here. And we go live every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, unless I'm not feeling well, on YouTube. So thanks for meeting me there. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to be notified. Thank you very much. And if you're seeing me on Facebook and all those others, thanks for being here as well. All right, number 9. Now that we got that out of the way, rat infestation. This sounds perfect. Have you seen in Chicago, I think it is, there's like a piece of concrete on a walkway where a rat was, its frame, its body was, concrete was poured over, the rat was pulled out, but the impression still stayed there. It's very popular amongst the locals there. True story. Okay, rat infestation in 1911. There was a discussion on what to do about the dead house in Bantry, Ireland. I'm Irish. Kiss me, I'm Irish. It's almost St. Paddy's Day. As it turned out, the dead were being housed in a workhouse chapel before families could claim them and prepare them for burial. The main problem with the dead house, that sounds so terrible. Like the names, like I don't eat okra because it sounds gross. Grits. That's funny. The problem with the dead house was that it was more like a rat house. The rat infestation in the chapel was so terrible that large stones had to be placed over the coffins to prevent the rats from getting at the corpses and eating them. The deceased. Why is it the corpse? Like, I mean, this is a really dumb question. Is that the medical, is that not a medical term? Corpse. So, like, it's like demeaning. I'm reading the teleprompter. Problem. The debate over what to do about the problem was rather heated, with at least one person seeing no issue with rats eating the dead. I'd like to have met that person. I'd like to have heard the reasoning behind, hey, yeah, it's fine. Like, I know that's Sally's loved one right there, and it's totally fine that we have this little rat that you find in sewers and probably walking around in your filth, chewing on her. Not to be graphic, but that's literally, I would look at them like they're the biggest. Do you think, I don't even know why I would even ask this. Do you think it's bad that a rat would be eating on a loved one in 1911 in the dead house? Let me know in the chat. Woke up, number 8, with 2 dead bodies. Wow. If you're just joining, we're talking about tales from like the morgue and essentially horror stories of terrible morgues or gross versions of in the 1800s, 1900s is where we are right now. But the night is still young. And right now, if you click right below, you can get 20% off of my brand new merch. The code is below. Click the link, get 20% off merch, brand new merch store, NathanMorrisMusic.com. And we're playing shows. We're getting added all the time. Shows are April 18th, somewhere nowhere in New York City. New York City! You're welcome. If you're in New York City, I would love to see you, but we have more shows coming in. I just saw earlier tonight as far as, Nathan, do you want to play this event? Yes. Will there be a microphone? Woke up with 2 dead bodies. Or number 8, imagine what it would be like to wake up next to dead people, because it's happened. If you can think it, it's happened. Like if you come up with some silly, crazy thought, then more than likely in life it's happened, which is crazy to think about. My brother told me that, and I was like, whoa, because you could think up some really weird stuff. But this person woke up next to dead people. It happened in San Francisco, California, in 1870, when a German being treated in a hospital appeared to be dead. Here we go. Yep, his body was immediately taken to the hospital's dead house, morgue, and deposited in a case where 2 other bodies had already been placed, and between them. So essentially like a big bona fide coffin, casket, but like medically, I would assume, but medicine back then. All right, so they'd already been placed, the deceased. The cover was put on, and the keeper of the dead retired for the night. So essentially now like the morgue security is what it would be. But they have a very important job, really, because they're the ones that are checking in funeral professionals and coroners, and they're making sure that in and out and everything is being very closely watched. This individual, however, was like, peace, I'm done for the night. At around midnight, the German woke up and started to scream. Hospital staff woke up the keeper, I guess the keeper of the morgue, dead house, sleeps on the grounds, which is pretty interesting, and told him to check on the situation, but the man was too afraid to move. He was resolved to let the ghosts fight it out amongst themselves, but he soon caved in to the pressure to check the room, meaning the keeper was worried sick because he was like, oh my gosh, those are ghosts, when in fact, German dude wakes up from what they thought was him being dead. But back then, when you pronounce someone dead, it was like, let's put a mirror under your nose. It didn't fog up. You dead. Upon opening the door, the keeper saw the German standing in the death gown placed on deceased persons and fainted. The German ran out of the door and through the corridors of the hospital. He was in such a mad panic that staff had to wrestle him until he fell to the floor. A physician was called in and restored the German to his senses. Well, at least they know how to restore to senses, because they obviously don't need to know, they can't tell if they're dead or not. I mean, that would be mortifying. And actually, there are more recent cases where this has happened. I mean, it happens where people are pronounced dead. They are transported to the morgue of the hospital, and I can't snap well, and they come to. There are a few documented cases. Well, I'm sure there's more than a few. It's just I can recall a couple, like the one in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania a few years ago, 71-year-old man. It was in the news about how he was picked up by the funeral home and taken back to the funeral home's preparation room. Now, nothing had started as far as preparation, but true story. What would you do? Let me know in the chat. What would you do if you awoke and you're in a morgue and you're like, oh my gosh? Let me know in the chat. A place to finish dying is number 7, and I'm glad you're here. We're talking about, morgues and dead houses is what this one apparently is called. The dead house in Chinatown, Los Angeles, California, took on the extra role of housing the nearly deceased. Nearly. According to an 1888 report, a Chinese dead house is usually a tumble down and isolated. What? Into which celestials are overtaken by incurable diseases. They're thrown and they're allowed to die. So it's like this chute, if you will, like tuberculosis hospitals, like the one in Louisville, Kentucky. That's now, what's that place called? Let me know in the chat. I can't think of it. They do ghost tour. Oh my God, it slipped my mind. They had this chute, and it was a 700-foot, and they put the loved one, and they shoot them down, and they would be in these piles. It was so that they didn't pass these diseases. Tuberculosis was just so deadly back then. So there's some understanding there, but Chinatown, they're like, hey, this person's going to die of this incurable, terrible disease. We're just going to go ahead and let them on go. I don't know. What are your thoughts? In one case, the dying person was a man suffering from leprosy. I've read the Bible, and I know that leprosy is absolutely a terrible, terrible means. You just got your arms and legs and fingers and things just rotting off, and I couldn't imagine. And Mother Teresa, she would sit with the lepers, which is beautiful. I don't know that I would have the strength. This person that threw them down obviously didn't. The dying person was a man suffering from leprosy, and the policeman had entered the dead house and discovered the emaciated man, who was groaning in pain and appeared to be rotting from the inside out. Leprosy does that. And why was there a policeman just wandering around into the dead house? The concerned officer, my phone rang. What was the over-under? Let me know. A concerned officer returned to police headquarters and reported the incident. Since it was leprosy, a feared disease, it was decided to leave the man where he was until a decision could be made in the case. No further word was published on the incident, but it could be assumed that the man probably passed away inside the dead house, the morgue. There was no word because, they were like, you know what, officer, said the chief, just let him be. So the emaciated man, obviously hungry, he just died. 1888, Chinatown. I don't know. People didn't know what to do in the 1800s. Hell, they didn't know what to do till I wouldn't know what to do. But there's dignity that must be carried out. Let me know in the chat. Have you ever been to Chinatown? I mean, apparently. I keep going back to those shoots and just thinking about, like, people. How could you put someone in a chute? Because the only chute that I know of outside of, like, going down a slide on a playground would be a garbage chute. It doesn't sit well. Thanks for being here again. No running water. Oh, this one's going to be good. This is number 6. Of all the necessities, this is true, one might think should be in a dead house, morgue, that's fact. Running water would be at the top of the list, yes. However, in a letter to the editor written in 1886, here we go. A concerned citizen brought up the then current problems with the Fremantle, Western Australia dead house. So we've got some problems in Albany, Western Australia, and now Fremantle, Western Australia. According to the letter, the dead house, where autopsies were often performed, had no running water whatsoever. The room was without a bench, and the door to the dead house did not latch shut, meaning there's no privacy whatsoever. So these people are exposed to anybody coming in, and whether stealing their bodies, stealing jewelry, stealing their clothing, something you get. Obviously, if you've been following for a while, we cover all kinds of topics. There was no latch. People could come and go as they saw it, leaving bodies desecrated. I already said. There was no consideration given to the deceased, even though the colonial surgeon had been pushing for some resolution to the problem for some time with the higher-ups, and it was clearly a money issue, but the public was growing increasingly upset over the conditions of the dead. Finally, there are strength in numbers. If you see something, say something. If something is not good, it's okay to speak up. It's okay to say something. Who gives a crap about feelings in serious matters such as this? Obviously, my hope is you don't ever run into something like this. But it was 1886, not that it makes it better. Have you ever had to speak up? Have you ever saw something and you're like, should I say something? Let me know in the chat. You don't have to go into detail. But I can see how it could sometimes be, I don't want somebody to be mad. I don't want this. You know what? You shake that tree. You cause that ruckus. Yeah, seriously, speak up if you see something bad being done to others. Salisbury Prison is number 5 on crazy things in the morgues and gross, the 1800. Yeah. John G. Weaver belonged to the 2nd Ohio Cavalry during the U.S. Civil War. After he was taken prisoner by the South, he admitted that he was treated extremely well until the day the train came and took him to Salisbury Prison in North Carolina. Have you ever been to Salisbury Prison in North Carolina? I mean, like where it was? Inside the prison, Weaver encountered many starving prisoners. Rations were tight, and some days the men went without food at all. To top it all off, prison was damp and muddy during the rainy months, and many men died from starvation and disease. Each morning, though, the death guards collected the dying and those near death from the prison and deposited the bodies into the dead house, so that there were people that weren't dead but almost dead, which is wild. Again, back to that thing. But this was just the start of the day. In Weaver's personal account, he said all day long could be seen their wasted and half-naked forms carried by the dead guard or perhaps by some of their surviving comrades. So not only are these ill and dying people, they're carrying the close to death, near death, and dead. And they're sick as can be and might be to that point soon themselves, but they're the ones carrying them. Where they were piled upon each other like cordwood is what Officer Weaver is saying. After the bodies were dropped off at the dead house, a dead wagon, now known as a hearse, would haul the bodies out to mass trench graves. Even though the wagons would go back and forth from the dead house to the graves, the dead house was never free of dead bodies. So there was such massive death that the morgue itself was constantly filled. That's wild. Being able to navigate that in PTSD, 1800s, having that, I can imagine. I had no idea what that was. Like, what is this? What's mental health? What's mental health awareness? I mean, there's so many things wrong to talk about in this. Let me know in the chat. No, obviously the hearse wouldn't be going out to the field in their dead wagon. I mean, cemetery is a field per se, but I picture like this, like a tobacco flatbed or something where, you know, whenever you're cutting tobacco and you're throwing it. Anyway, twice to the dead house. So this is going to be someone dies again. Anyway, before we do that, just want to plug the new merch is available via the link. Be sure to click it. 20% off right now in the store using code, and I'll put it down right below there. Also, I had a brain fart. I smell toast, burnt toast. Also, my podcast, You'll Die Trying, every episode, every week, we release one on Tuesday, so be sure to check that out. Dropping a new one, that would be tomorrow. Twice to the dead house. Sorry. I didn't smell burnt toast, so I'm still here. Robert Hughes was taken by police cab to Newcastle Hospital in Australia in 1901. When the cab arrived at the hospital gates, Hughes was given a quick examination and pronounced dead on arrival. Mirror, he did. As was the custom, the cab drove the body to the back of the hospital, and Hughes was taken into the dead house. The back of the hospital is always where you will find the comings and goings of transfer vehicles. He was placed on a cold slab, at least a cold slab, and not wood. That no doubt caused a shock to his system. Suddenly, he started to wiggle and breathe heavily. The police were startled, and a doctor was called into the dead house because he was still alive. After another quick exam to confirm that the man was actually alive. What? I mean, he's like, I'm alive. Hughes was taken to the hospital and placed in a proper bed. There, he died a second time. What? 5 minutes later. Wow. Sadly, he stayed dead this time and was taken to the dead house once more. The doctors did not know the exact cause of death, but they believed that Hughes had died of old age or poisoning or a massive heart attack because you scared the hell out of him because you thought he was dead and you put him in a morgue. Let me know in the chat, like, you're the police officer. What would you do? You're the doctor. You see a man moving and you're like, let me see if you're still alive. Let me know. What would you do? The moving skull. Now we're getting to the creepy stuff. This is how we do it. I don't know why we always get to this. Like, the unexplained is amazing. There's intrigue and mystery and awe. There's not to compare like ghosts, goblins, paranormal, and weird stuff to that of Santa Claus, but as a child, just the majesty and magic of believing in Santa and this unknown, right? Similar, I think, as adults for this kind of stuff. It's just why I like learning these kinds of stories. Like, we're doing all kinds of haunted military forts and battlefield series over on TikTok. Be sure to subscribe to me over there, follow me over there. Pretty fun to do that. Pranks in the dead house used to be a common occurrence. There are numerous accounts of medical students posing as dead people and faking ghost haunts. This happened, like, I've read so many articles where medical students are like, oh, let's play a prank. Let's do this. And it's not a very good idea. But one doctor had a totally different night. As he told a New Orleans paper in 1884, see, we're staying in the 1800s, early 1900s. Like, nowadays, the likelihood of any of this is little. He once had a patient with an aneurysm. As the case puzzled the doctor, he decided that he was going to perform an autopsy upon the patient's death. The doctor did not have to wait long for the patient to die, and the body was sent to the dead house to await inspection. So apparently the autopsy is going to be performed in this morgue. And since I've been in the profession, there has only been one hospital that the doctor, or excuse me, the pathologist would have done an autopsy. It's now goes to this medical examiner's office. For instance, Louisville, Kentucky has one. You have one in Madisonville, Kentucky. There are a bunch of other places, obviously, throughout the country and Kentucky, but those are two that strike me. So the hospital will not do an autopsy for the most part, unless someone is watching from Kentucky and say, "You're wrong, Nathan." In that case, please let me know. I would love to know. I just want to know. All right. The doctor went to the dead house an hour before midnight. There he he started the process of the autopsy and examined his former patient as the doctor did the work by a lit gas burner. So could you imagine just like this tiny little like lit gas burner, and that's your light, and I have lights all around me to illuminate this picture. He believed that he was the only living person in the room. He inspected the area from where the noise came, because there was a noise, but he only saw 5 skulls resting on the floor that were being prepared by the medical students for their cabinets. I think it's funny how when I like read back over something that I'd forgotten about, I look at you like, oh no. Okay. He went back to work on the autopsy. No sooner did he start than he caught sight of some movement from that area. He stopped his work again and watched as a skull slowly moved toward him. Medical students, I bet, and they're gonna get in some deep doo-doo. He eyed the floor, expecting to find strings pulling the skull, but his inspection yielded no tricks. The doctor, claiming to feel rather peculiar at that moment, sat on a stool and smoked his pipe. He could not take his eyes off the skull. Maybe I was wrong. The skull moved again, coming straight at him. It screeched along the floor until the doctor could not take the suspense. He jumped up from his stool and picked up the skull. Inside was a rat. There you go, daggum rats. That's why. You know what? If you go back and you say, we don't care about rats and what they do inside the morgue, here's a reason you would care. Yeesh. The rat was freed and the doctor went back to work. Let me know in the chat, like, what would you do? People love Halloween and people think, oh, it's so fun. Okay, but you're in a real setting, a real skull. You're trying to do like medical stuff on a deceased loved one. And then you got this Bunsen burner lighting up the tiniest little corner of the room. No thanks. Let me know in the chat. I mean, I already feel kind of, ooh. All right. Number 2, we're talking about, history of like crazy, scary morgues. We call them dead houses in the 1800s, apparently. Australia does, Ireland does. The dead house of Paris was situated on a bank of the Seine. Is it Seine? It's Seine, right? And was used by the city to house those who came to a violent end. Oh, no. Before we continue, I'm glad that you're here. Let me know that you've purchased merch. Let me know in the chat, because while supplies last, we're giving away limited edition autographed copies of the first project ever, A Gentleman's Closure. I'm really proud of this project. This was the one that really started the career for me. It's featured in Starbucks Worldwide. Autographed copies of while they last. Again, while they last, they will be shipped separately from your order. Please note, I have had numerous people ask, and obviously I didn't specify that very well, apparently. Sorry, everyone that I work with. Yes, so these are shipped out separately. While supplies last, buy a mug, buy a shirt, buy a hoodie. This will come separate. Thanks for your support. All right, the Dead House of Paris. So this is a dead house morgue for people that have come to tragic ends. Whether the victims died on land or in water, their bodies were placed in the dead house until either a family member claimed them or they were buried in a poor man's grave, or pauper. 2 men operated the dead house in 1839, and both lived with their families on the grounds in the upper floor of this building, like above the morgue. No, thank you. Funeral home, it's different. I mean, maybe it's not. Do you think it's different? Let me know. The men, with the help of their wives, kept impeccable records of the dead. Names, causes of death, the dates the bodies were brought in, etc. The men witnessed many tragedies at La Morgue, but perhaps one of the saddest was the case of this little Leonore. I smell burnt toast. She was a small child, and one winter day, her perfect little body was laid on this slab inside the dead house. The nurse carried her in. With tears streaming down her cheeks, the nurse explained that she and the child had been on a stagecoach. The nurse had fallen asleep, and the child had slipped away and suffocated among the luggage of the other passengers. Tragedy, I mean, like we're talking about these 1800s tragic events. This stuff happens today where children will sleep with mother and, they'll slip and they suffocate. It's so sad and tragic, and it's such... Being on the other side of that, this nurse, I would presume, would be the mother. Be awful. Be awful. The nurse had the little girl down and began to kiss her cheeks and her little hands. The nurse begged the dead house watcher to bring the child back to life. So the people who live upstairs with their wives are being begged. They're not doctors, by the way. When she realized it could not be done, she asked to see the little girl's bright blue eyes one last time. Whoa. The nurse left, but was not gone for long. The nurse's body was soon wheeled into the dead house herself, dripping water upon the ground. Her body was laid beside that of the little girl to await someone to claim them. It does not say how she died. Wow. Things just got a little heavy. We're over here talking about history of things, but history is not invincible from experiencing grief. Obviously, tragedy has paved the way and has created, the timeline that has now gotten to us. The books, history books, are just filled with war and illness. And again, there's victory in suffering. And I hope that aside from me just making the night just so sad and that you are experiencing joy in some way. I love to know where I've been, because you can't know where you're going if you don't. I love learning about things like this and sharing stories of old. The funeral profession is largely unchanged for hundreds of years because it's riddled with tradition and beauty and service and excellence and selflessness. And there's a lot to say for that. I mean, it's a great profession and it's seen a lot. So to those who are in the funeral profession that you may know, but maybe you've had a positive experience with, maybe you haven't had an opportunity to thank them, I encourage you to thank them. Go out of your way. Let them know. Write a 5-star review on Yelp or on Google, or if you have their phone number, because I'm assuming if you've had an experience with a funeral director, they've probably given you your cell phone number. At the cost of themselves, they're available to you. Appreciate all of the funeral professionals out there and our first responders and you. All right, last but not least, a makeshift dead house. Okay. The makeshift morgue. Think about Civil War, for instance. Civil War is like when they really started to embalm, because these young men, 15, 16-year-olds, are just dying on the battlefield, and they're trying to get them back to their homes, so they would embalm them probably just behind the enemy line, or just behind like the battle lines. And I'm assuming the makeshift morgues are going to be pretty close to that, because they have to retrieve the bodies to then embalm them. Makeshift dead houses are very common whenever a major accident happens and the authorities are left with multiple fatalities. One such terrible accident happened in Victoria, Australia. So also, if there's like a mass casualty, like a major flood or something like a huge tornado or tsunami, something like that, they will set up a makeshift area as well. So we're back in Australia in 1908. 2 trains collided. Several first and second class cars. You notice how first class, second class, it was very much a class thing in the early 1900s for sure. So you have your first class, second class cars were smashed into pieces, leaving bodies all torn in the broken wood and ironwork. The trains burst into flames even, burning the injured and making rescue in the heavy smoke nearly impossible. There were loved ones all over the place that succumbed to injuries and from this tragedy. And those who were able to walk tripped over the wounded, the deceased. 43 people had been brutally killed and 232 injured. News of the accident traveled fast, obviously. Soon, the station was flooded with the friends and relatives of those who had been on the trains. Thrill seekers also turned up with the hopes of catching sight of the gruesome affair. It's like people say, oh, you're a train wreck. You know, it's like a figure of speech, or, you know, you can't turn away. You got to like watch the train wreck. It was in the early 1900s even too. Wow. So medical workers and railroad employees, they rushed to remove those who were still alive. After that, the deceased loved ones were removed, and an account states, this was written account, bodies of women and men with features battered and limbs mangled lay out on the platform. One, a corpse with, I don't want to read that part, lay close by a mother with her children. So this is just massively tragic. This is horrible. As the bodies were collected, the dead house had to be made to have 2 waiting rooms. All the furniture was taken out of one room of this house, and the bodies were laid side by side. My gosh. Tiny lamps lit up the room, so they were working again by essentially these like lamp lights. Wow. So they would bring in family members 6 at a time to claim their loved ones in these makeshift dead houses, which is wild because that is now you have your mobile morgues, if you will, especially during COVID, the pandemic. You saw images all over the news of these refrigerator trucks and these refrigerator tents and these, you know, it was just the tragedy that ensued. This live, you know what? I'm going to liven it up. I'm going to liven it up and just tell you, I think that it's important to hear. I feel sometimes heaviness because it reminds us of what we have. It reminds us of life, and, you know, the chances of us being here are like 1 in hundreds of billion. And we have this opportunity to do great things. And I'm grateful for that opportunity, even amidst all the heaviness, maybe sadness, grief, tragedy. I hope that you know that you're worthy and you're worth it to be loved and cared for. And your support means so very much to me. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve so many beautiful people. Perhaps you're watching and I've had the opportunity to connect with you and your family during some of your darkest and delicate of times. And it's those moments, it's those I've served with that have inspired these songs that are resonating, and they're charting at radio nationwide at number 22 at Billboard. I'm overwhelmed by the support, and I thank you. I thank you for buying the merch and streaming the music and just telling people. So that's what I challenge you to do. Buy a piece of merch, get while they last, an autographed copy of the project that started it all. You can't get this anywhere else. And again, they're shipped separately while supplies last. Keep that in mind. All right. You have heard it here, folks. The dead houses / morgues and some pretty wild stories pertaining to. Thanks for being here. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to click the bell to be notified if you're on YouTube when I release content exclusive. If you find me right now on Facebook or X or whatever, I'm grateful that you're there. Be sure to follow me. I will follow him. I'll follow him wherever he may go.